Hello again, the summer transfer window is upon us, which means it's time for some more Football Spy. Welcome to the show, which will take on a slightly different format this year. We'll be with you every week instead of every day with a look at all of the transfer activity doing the rounds. And it's a warm welcome to John Cross, my colleague at the Daily Mirror, who joins us to talk Arsenal. We'll be attempting to answer some of your transfer questions right here on the show. We start, however, with a look at the top 5 transfer stories on the Mirror Football website over the past 7 days. At 5, we can work it out. Roberto Martinez set to raid his former club to take no less than 5 players plus 2 of his assistants to Everton. At 4, the Spain super striker David Villa will be in the Premier League next season, but will he be at Arsenal or at Spurs? At 3, Manchester United are keen on some sexy football. See what I did there. But will they tempt Fabregas away from Barcelona? At 2, the battle for Luis Suarez. Liverpool don't want to sell, but he wants to go, and both Real Madrid and Bayern Munich are circling. Munich with a swap deal with Arjen Robben going the other way today. Top story this one, Manchester City having a long look at the Real Madrid defender Pepe. He will probably need a separate plane from Spain to carry all of his Oscars from his theatrics over there. Time now for a chat with friend of the show, John Cross. He's here to talk all things Arsenal, and that talk about Wayne Rooney, we were talking about him earlier, just won't go away, John. So give us a lowdown on where things stand with him.
Well, I think he's someone that Arsenal are looking at, have looked at, have discussed. I mean, it's a really interesting scenario for me, this one. It's clear, I think, that Arsene Wenger is an admirer of the player. I think it's an interesting scenario now, how it will play out. I would be still surprised to see Wayne Rooney at the start of next season lining up in an Arsenal shirt.
Really?
It'd be pleasantly surprising, but because I think it would just be a fantastic move for Arsenal, for the Premier League even. We love those sort of big money moves, sort of cross between rivals, you know, a la Robin van Persie last summer. So they create interest and they're very exciting, but I still feel it would be easier for Wayne Rooney to stay where he is. I think he's unhappy. I think he probably is right, time for a change. I still think it's easier to stay where you are, and I think the likelihood is that he'll end up staying at Old Trafford.
You've done a few pieces for the Mirror Football website over the last month or so, suggesting there might be an agenda to force Wayne Rooney out, and that Sir Alex Ferguson may have been laying the groundwork for that to happen. So, although you're saying it could be easy for him to stay, it looks as though perhaps they don't want him. Do you get that sense? Well,
not only that, but I think that Wayne Rooney, in actual fact, would probably feel that it's time for a change. And why not? I think sometimes if you've been there a number of years at the club as he has, then perhaps it is time to move on for pastures new. And I get the sense that he probably feels, you know what, it'd be good for me to move. While I think that he's categoric that he hasn't actually formally asked for a transfer, and I think that's really important to kind of put out there, that he hasn't actually asked for a transfer. I think he's had informal discussions with Sir Alex Ferguson before he, of course, retired, saying that where is my future, what direction, do I need to move on? That's a long way from a formal transfer request, which is something, very, very particular in football, which can ultimately, of course, cost you a good deal of money if you are indeed sold. I mean, sometimes you waive your rights to the sort of things that are written in the contract. So, I mean, I think that I just get the impression, though, that perhaps it's time for a change. But as I say, it's easier, I think, Man United would have to replace him with a huge signing. And I think if David Moyes can win him round and sort of convince him to stay, I get the impression that Sir Alex Ferguson was trying to sort of kind of almost lay a groundwork to sort of move him on, to be cast as the baddie in all this, the villain, if you like, to sort of try and move him, ease him on.
To take the heat off David Moyes.
Exactly.
Maybe.
David Moyes arrives, and David Moyes is left with a situation where if they do indeed sell, then it's almost Sir Alex Ferguson to blame rather than David Moyes. So David Moyes arrives with a clean slate, and it's almost, kind of Fergie taking one for the team, if you like.
after last summer where we saw Robin van Persie going from Arsenal to Manchester United, anything is possible in the Premier League, and I could see Wayne Rooney playing for Arsenal next season. He's been saying today in the Daily Mirror that he wants to play up front. He doesn't want to play a deep-lying midfield role that he was playing so often under Sir Alex Ferguson last season. He would really have a point to prove next season if he were to be playing in his favoured position, wouldn't he?
He would, yeah. I still feel that Wayne Rooney, at 27 years of age, I just think he's got so much more time in front of him. You know, 3 or 4 years, really at the very, very top. And I do feel that he probably feels, well, I'm desperate to show something here. I can still score goals. I can still be prolific. And look at his record. His record shows that he's a really consistent scorer of goals, you know, in English football. But I feel that often he's been sort of asked to do something deeper lying in midfield, even left side. And I think there's no doubt about it. Maybe his nose has been put out of joint by Robin van Persie. Suddenly there's a new sheriff in town, you know, and it's Robin van Persie is the main man. He's the goal scorer. Rooney is expected to do a different job. I think the two things aren't a coincidence.
Okay, let's take you through some more players linked with Arsenal over the last couple of weeks. The Swansea goal machine Michu has been another name that's emerged in recent days. John, where do you see that fitting into Arsene Wenger's transfer plans?
Well, I think he'd cost so much money now. I do think that he would be attractive to lots of clubs. But really, the time to get Michu was last year, wasn't it? Really, I think that would be the time you can get value for money. Now you're looking at a big money buy. I think Arsenal were really keen though for a big striker to kind of really excite the fans, bring them alive. And I think Michu has set the Premier League alight, really. But
Michu's not a centre forward as such, is he? He's more of a deeper lying.
He's a clever player, yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe Arsenal kind of need. You could argue that they need probably 2 strikers, so a contrast, you know, an out-and-out goal scorer, but also a deeper lying player. Mitchell has definitely got what it takes to kind of play at a top 4 club, in my view, and arguably he'd score even more goals, give him more chances. But I think at the moment at Swansea he can play sort of up the top, lead the line, deeper lying, and sort of, you know, almost drop back into midfield and be the number 10, if you like. I think he's a very exciting player. Okay.
Now, what we've seen over the last week or so is Arsene Wenger looking to get players off the wage bill. Lots of them, like Shamak, like Denilson, who are soaking up that wage bill. So just give us a bit of insight into what the club are doing. We understand Denilson could have his contract terminated at the end of June. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. I think there'll be an agreement whereby he can leave and they'll come to some sort of financial arrangement. I mean, they've already sort of looked to do that with a couple of others. I mean, the sort of the part of the South Korean striker, has been able to move on like that. I think also Squillaci out of contract now, Arshavin out of contract. If you work it out, they'll be sort of saving money. They'll also look on to move on. Sort of Bentner certainly wouldn't cancel his contract so readily available, I don't think. I think they'll be looking for a sizable fee on that one. But I just think they've reached a stage where they've got an awful lot of players to move on. And when we talk about sort of them having £70 million to spend, I think because they'll be saving so much on wages, all of that, if you like, can be spent on transfer fees, and the money they can save on wages can really help them bring in some big stellar names. They could save between about £300,000 and £400,000 a week on players moving on. Arshavin, £90,000 a week. Bentner, £52,000 a week. Those are really big sort of salaries and money that can be saved and spent on other really good deals for the club.
Often for the Mirror Football website, I've seen you writing about the fact that each transfer window is a very big one for Arsene Wenger, but you get the sense with Jose Mourinho back and City spending big and United spending big, this could be the biggest of all. Spurs need to spend big in order to keep Gareth Bale and surround him with quality players. Koscielny been saying in the papers today that if Arsenal don't surround him with champions, he could well be off. What sort of player do you think would appease somebody like Koscielny and also the fans?
Well, I think it would have to be someone with a real stellar name. I mean, Arsenal have been looking so much, and I think he'll go elsewhere now, Stevan Jovetic. But my point about him is that even though he's sort of Montenegro international and plays for Fiorentina, I mean, Juventus have been after him as well as sort of now Chelsea, who sort of entered the fray a bit on him. Is he that kind of stellar name?
No.
Is he going to sort of kind of, are people going to say, wow, you know, he'd be like sort of rolling back in time. They brought in Dennis Bergkamp, for example, and someone like that. I don't think he is, that's the thing. I think they really need to do a couple of deals which will really excite people. I mean, David Villa, ironically, you know, I think he might end up going to sort of, you know, somewhere else other than Arsenal. But in January, I think that would have almost been seen as a statement of intent. And yet he's an older player than Jovetic, and that's something that they've got to sort of overcome, really. I think Koscielny, having signed a big contract last year, a year ago, I think he'll stay. But the challenge is to get those players to make Arsenal competitive in winning trophies, but in also challenging for the title again.
David Villa, by the way, Spurs very much in for him. Where do you see him ending up? Spurs can't offer him Champions League football like Arsenal can, but Arsenal seem to be possibly unsure. I mean, how do you read that situation?
I think he's on their list, but I think while they were very keen to get it done in January and Barcelona stalled a bit, I don't think the interest is as strong. So I think it's one that they're sort of hoping to keep tabs on and hope no one does in the meantime. But I think, you know, as you've written, as I've written, that Spurs' interest is strong, and AVB actually has a really good personal relationship with him, which I think he'll try and utilise to try and convince him that Spurs is a good challenge, even though it's Europa League football rather than Champions League football for him, you know, if he does indeed go to White Hart Lane. So I think he'd be sort of slightly lower on the list for Arsenal.
One other player just to bring in before we leave you, Christian Benteke, all the rage, all the clubs in for him, Liverpool, Spurs and Arsenal linked with him as well, and he's been saying in Belgium that it would be very hard to turn Arsenal down if they were to come in for him. Lots of people interpreting his quotes in different ways, but just give us the picture regarding Arsenal and Benteke.
Oh, I think he's definitely on their radar. But again, it's Aston Villa. I think it would be so much easier for Aston Villa in terms of keeping the fans happy, if you like, or happier, to do business with someone like Atletico Madrid. I mean, you know, as you've written, Spurs are very interested in him as well. But how much would it take to, you know, prize him out of Aston Villa? I think that's the issue. You know, sort of if they bought him for £8 million from Genk last season. Fantastic credit to Paul Lambert for taking the sort of almost a chance on him, if you like. But a year on, he's been a sensation in the Premier League, and what strikes me about him is, for a Premier League club, you know what you're getting. You know that he's a player that would immediately fit in. He can score goals in the Premier League. He's got the physical kind of approach that fits in and has succeeded certainly for a season already. And so it's almost like a little bit more guaranteed with him than someone who's a little bit more experienced even, sort of, you know. So I think Benteke, from that point of view, is very attractive to Tottenham and Arsenal. Aston Villa would be castigated by their fans if they sold him lightly to another Premier League club. That's why I think the more probable destination for him would be Atletico Madrid. I actually think he might end up staying at Villa for another year. It certainly will if Paul Lambert has his way.
So that's it for this week. Football Spy is back next Wednesday with more transfer news, views and features. If you want to take part, drop us a line at Football Spy or at Darren on Twitter, and it's the same address if you want to drop us a video message to be included on the show. Football Spy is back for the 2013 summer transfer window. I'll see you next time.